All right. Greetings, YouTube. I wanted to give you a shout out. I want to give a shout out, sorry, to a subscriber that I have not seen before, who left a comment under my last video about Cardi B. She asked what was the Swedish model, and y'all know me, I usually get into detail like that, but as usual, I was fighting for time, as always, to record. So first, let me correct myself. I meant to say the Nordic model, not Swedish model, but I have seen articles in the past refer to this law as the Swedish model, but it's really the Nordic model. But that is where it is the buyer of sex who is removed from the situation or the act of buying or purchasing a person. Because that's the way I see it. It's not just purchasing sex. And he's basically held into custody. In some cases, he's even brought to exposure to his family and workplace for his activities. Now, for the sex worker, she or he, and this is an important thing I want to stress, should be the one who is dealt with differently. Instead of being criminalized or jailed, they should be offered safe exiting, not only from the situation, if the authorities catch the situation of sex being purchased, but from they should be exited, period, from being prostituted or from prostitution. This means that if they're being prostituted, the pimp is jailed. The other piece is that the state should be able to provide a free exiting program for the sex worker. This should be some kind of free housing, education, therapy, whatever is needed, so the sex worker is not dependent on Johns to live. Now, I know the Nordic model has a lot of kinks. After all, it's provided by the state. Like all the other European countries, it is still a capitalist state, Sweden. And this means that capitalism still has a class system, rich, and then there's the working poor. If there's not enough work to go around, which is usually the case under capitalism, and welfare is provided is not substantial, then workers are on their own. This usually leads to the poor having to turn to criminal activities, quote unquote, criminal, as defined by the state and ruling class, and therefore they turn to prostitution or whatever. They never dismantle the sex industry in Sweden. They don't dismantle the sex industry at all in any of the European countries where they've either legalized it, decriminalized it, or go with what's known as the Nordic model. There is no substantial or strong enough exiting program where exploited women will be compelled enough to not wind up continuing in the sex trade. What the Nordic model really did was that they got men to see the air and pain for sex once caught, and the law makes it super expensive to purchase sex, but not make paying for sex impossible. In other words, by getting rid of the sex trade altogether. In other words, it still exists. It's still part of the society and the culture that purchasing a body is normalized, just more riskier and more expensive for the John. As usual, anything a state under capitalism can only provide progressive reform, but I am supportive of such progression until an actual anti-capitalist revolution can dismantle sex work, period. Now, Speaking as an anti-statist communist myself, in terms of prostitution or any form of sex work, I want it eliminated, just as I want capitalism to be eliminated. I see no difference between basically sexual capitalism, if you will, and capitalism, period. I don't consider it work labor. I consider it, if anything, a form of slavery. Speaking as, so in other words, a socialist society should provide whatever needs to anyone. Therefore, there should be no need for anyone to prostitute themselves or be prostituted. There should be no need for anyone to display themselves sexually in exchange for a wage. If this happens, the person who is sexually exploited would be looked after, and those doing the exploitation should meet the people's justice. I'm not going to go in details of whatever that should be, because right now I'm only talking here in vision. If you hear anyone who calls themselves a radical, a revolutionary, a progressive, or any of that stuff, but saying that they support prostitution or they just think it should just be legalized, I think that their idea of considering themselves a revolutionary should be questioned. In other words, I don't think that you're very revolutionary. I don't think that you're a communist, and I don't think that you're a progressive if you support any kind of form of prostitution. As a matter of fact, I think that a lot of you guys that call yourselves socialists, you're really brocialists and you're activists. If you support it and you think that it should still exist, it's bullshit. You should want to dismantle capitalism and any kind of form of exploitation like that, period. I have an article in the low bar on medium.com written by Jonah Mix called Pro-Prostitution Marxism is Revisionist Woman-Hating Nonsense. You should read it. So that's in the link. And lastly, I just want to say that it's super fucking cool that I have a viewer who is named Assata, and we all know who Assata Shakur is. She is the revolutionary black woman who was a former Black Panther. She was jailed but was freed